Welcome to our last panel of the day, What Should 6G Standards Actually Enable? I'm here with Milap Majmundar, the Director of Advanced RAN Technology, Standards and Spectrum at AT&T, Mirko Cano, the Director of the Mobile Competence Center at ETSI, and Amina Boubendir, the Head of Research and Standardization at Airbus Defense and Space. Thank you all for joining me. I'm going to kick us off right away for the sake of time. So, Milap, from an operator's perspective, what are the biggest gaps in 5G RAN standards that you'd want corrected or reimagined in 6G from day one?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to the panel. Really appreciate the opportunity. So yeah, what are the things that 5G standards, didn't do well or, may not be able to do well as we look forward to newer things that may be coming down the line? So maybe let's start with a couple of examples, and some of these topics have been talked about in the past. One thing that comes up a lot is native AI ML, because when 5G standards were developed, they were not developed considering AI ML functionality. So this is something we believe should be enabled from the get-go, maybe have an integrated framework for data collection, for model training, delivery, and lifecycle management, and operator visibility and control. Other aspects are sensing is another capability that's talked about. Some work has been done in 5G, but it's sort of an add-on. So this is a capability that can be developed from the get-go in 6G, the ability to support a wide range of use cases, a flexible air interface to balance sensing and communication needs. A third aspect is a scalable design. We believe 6G should support a wide range of device types right from the first release, such as, for example, replacement for LTE CATM type of devices, because 5G did not develop a solution for this device category. And then finally, one thought is we need to be able to clean up how mandatory features are specified and managed in standards, because currently, when a feature is mandatory, it is not IoDT'd across devices and networks. And that becomes a real problem when an operator wants to deploy a so-called mandatory feature later down the road. So I'll just stop there with a few examples like this.
Perfect. Yeah, because I would love to hear from our other two speakers kind of basically the same question, right? So what do you each feel was missing in 5G that must be baked into 6G from the start? And Mirko, we can start with you.
Yeah, rather than thinking about missing, I will just flip it and say what was done, what was standardized too much. And one thing we have a knowledge in 3PP is that we have too many options. We need to streamline to make it the standards work more efficient. And we have seen it, for example, in the case of 5G, we have a 5G standalone option, but we have also 5G non-standalone option, and that has had an impact on implementation. So some of the members have stated that we want, day one, we want to have it simple. We want to evolve to 6G and please make it simple. We don't want to standardize too many features that later are not just implemented. We don't want to maintain specifications and features during the years that are not basically implemented, deployed at all. Then there's other things that I heard mentioned that they would like to have it in day one. And it may sound funny because we're talking about mobile networks, but they want to have a voice implemented from day one. They want to have a 6G voice solution from day one, which seems obvious, but it hasn't been that obvious in previous generations as well. And of course, as Amina can comment, is that the role of verticals is essential. We have started working with them in 5G, but we want to see more industry. We want to see more automotive. We want to see more satellite operators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Amina, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, if I can build on what Milap and Mirko have just highlighted. Again, I wouldn't maybe give what was missing, but maybe what came later on after 5G was starting to be standardized is more maybe the AI aspect for sure. Everything that was related to sensing or merging different technologies, the convergence of technologies came a little bit later as well. While 5G was somehow carrying a strong message to the industry saying, we're going to solve your problems. It's going to be more a 4G plus one, but for mass market, but a big plus to the industry or the verticals. It somehow fulfilled that way because it addressed many use cases from the industry, but still some enablers were not included in the standardization work itself, but came afterwards in the different releases of 5G. Maybe there's also a positive side of that is that many research work has been injected little by little in 5G, all the releases of 5G. And somehow led to putting 6G in another stage, saying, okay, 6G will be the federating generation, the federating next G to everything we have somehow missed or not included from 5G. And I agree with Mirko about the verticals. They were in 5G, but maybe they were not as vocal as the standardization wanted to hear from their requirements and their needs, so they can build the right system architecture and radio access networks.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the discussion. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives on that question. So Milap, back to you. Operators often argue that standards move too slowly for the pace of innovation. Do you think 6G standards can realistically move faster? If so, how?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in the standards world, we tend to operate in these somewhat artificially determined 10-year cycles of Gs, but innovation doesn't happen in 10-year cycles. Innovation is constantly happening in various ecosystems, and operators actually want to consume the innovation when it happens or when it is needed, as opposed to waiting for a whole new G to come around or waiting for that nth feature to be developed and eventually becoming available. So what really this means is that we want to have an open, agile, programmable wireless network that is able to consume new features and integrate new hardware as and when is needed, driven by the business needs. So how does that translate to 6G standards? So 6G standards need to then be designed to enable this vision by developing a scalable cloud-native framework that allows operators to deploy these new features as and when they are developed and needed. And what this really means is that, you know, we should be able to deploy via software upgrades on existing capable hardware and deploy hardware as needed for enabling new spectrum or new features. So essentially, 6G should start the journey towards what we call a generation-free network that enables operators to more readily bring new innovations to the network and eventually to our customers.
Excellent, thank you. So Mirko, Amina, you both mentioned the need to really bring the verticals more into the 6G standard space. So Mirko, standards development is sometimes criticized as closed or telco-centric, as you both alluded to. How can 3GPP and ETSI more meaningfully involve industries like automotive, aerospace, etc., in the 6G process?
Yeah, from ETSI point of view, we have been working on that for quite some time now. We signed memorandum of understanding with all the organizations that work in tangentially in parallel with us, or to avoid overlap, to avoid duplication of work. We recognize that to enable standards, it's a great benefit of all the stakeholders of industry to have a work split to coordinate and to synchronize the duplication that just basically does not benefit anyone. In 5G, as we mentioned before, we started inviting verticals into 3PP, because the first step to have them involved in the standard is to invite them to contribute. So 3PP is not a closed club. Anyone can be a member, and but can come and contribute and bring their view, their own requirements. So this is what happened with industrial IoT. This is what happened with satellite. And this is what has happened with automotive. Although in this case, I think something needs to be done much better. And I hope that in 6G, the role of the automotive industry will become more important. Related to that, we have in our last meeting in Beijing, in the plenaries, a liaison statement from the 5G Automotive Association saying, okay, listen, you're going to start with 6G. Automotive has specific requirements for 6G, because we want cars speaking to each other, device to device communication without involving the network. We have very dense area communication, or the opposite. A car can be in the middle of nowhere. We want coverage all the time. In automotive, they're working with development cycles much longer than in 3PP. In 3PP, we have the concept of releases, but in a car, you buy a car and you want it to last 10, 15, maybe 20 years. So you don't want the car manufacturer to go, okay, please now you have to implement release 18 or 19 in 2 years, and then I will come back to you, implement this, and then now you have to switch to 6G, and then you have to switch to... So this is a really different use case. So received this liaison statement, and the answer was clear. Please come to 3PP, bring contributions, show us your requirements, and we will make sure that we include them from day one. So the first thing, so basically we can summarize in it, just invite them to come to 3PP and make sure that all the verticals can participate from the beginning. We started in 5G, and in 6G will become even more important.
Great. And Amina, I obviously want your perspective here on this, right? So for the vertical perspective, what does meaningful involvement look like?
Yeah, I think what Mirko just introduced is quite clear in terms of who is leading 3GPP, or has been leading 3GPP standardization, knowing that it's not the only standardization body. Of course, we need also IEEE and many others that complete the system view, right? So it's definitely, 3GPP is definitely led by telcos, it has been led by telcos, and it still is, right? And let's say, any other technology or verticals that would like to benefit from the next G mobile system has to go there, as Mirko just highlighted. From the aerospace perspective, or the satellite perspective, or any non-terrestrial, I would say, platform for connectivity, that is still the case. And the satellite community has joined 3GPP and contributed and managed to include satellite communications, but also hubs and many flying platforms, non-terrestrial platforms, into the system. In 5G advanced, but now also where is 6G. So it has to be there. That's it. So the involvement has to be going there, being involved in the requirements definition, in the system definition, in all the radio access technologies advancement, and still be involved in what is needed. I mentioned IEEE, but many others I can mention, and that's really very familiar to the telcos that are already in 3GPP, and mainly the operators, is TM Forum, for example. That's also another a huge standardization body where satellite community is also gathering. So the meaningful is going, contributing, making sure we're open enough to know that we're not sometimes not speaking the same language. In terms of what a system, the cycles, that's really important, how much the vendors are open to integration, how difficult is integration when it comes to taking pieces from different vendors. The operation is also not the same, not with the same risk, not the same scales. So all this come into play when we are actually discussing technical specifications, and maybe the major standardization body remains 3GPP. So I think today it's quite significant, at least when we look at the journey of the satellite community joining, and yeah, with tangible results in the specifications themselves.
Yeah,
If I may add, I would like to mention as well, it was the deliberate step in 3PP that our first CC activity was a workshop involving non-3PP members. So we have that happened last year in March 2024 in Rotterdam. So we wanted to hear first for the non-typical 3PP members about what their vision on 6G was and the requirements. And as a first step, like, okay, now you can come to 3PP, but the first thing we did was to hear from them.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And spectrum is always an important thing to talk about when we go from 1G to the next every time. So Milap, spectrum has historically been a bottleneck in these generational shifts. What spectrum policy or allocation priorities should be considered critical to 6G to avoid maybe some of the past pain points?
Yeah, so let me start by saying that, at least in the US, the regulations don't typically tie a frequency band to a wireless technology generation. So, I mean, we as an operator would, want to be able to deploy 6G on any frequency band in any frequency range, as needed, depending upon the use cases for 6G. And especially being able to deploy 6G in existing 5G bands using efficient multi-rate spectrum sharing, where we are able to more easily transition the spectrum or migrate the spectrum to 6G as opposed to carving out spectrum. But then there's also the need to deploy 6G in new greenfield bands as they become available. Now, in terms of policy, at least past experience, has shown that the ecosystem seems to get the most value out of spectrum when the spectrum is licensed and high power. This essentially allows operators to provide, very uniform wide area coverage with a, very consistent user experience across a wide range of services. So that's certainly something we look forward to for the 6G, at least the 6G bands that are developed. And then it's also a fact that there are no clean bands available anymore. There's some or the other incumbents in different frequency bands as we look at them. And so clearly we need to be able to develop good mutually beneficial spectrum sharing frameworks so that we can coexist well with any incumbents who may be in that spectrum.
Great, thank you. Mirko, given ETSI's vantage point, where do you see duplication or fragmentation risks across global standard efforts, and how can 6G maybe avoid some of that?
Well, the first thing that 6G is a story of story 3PP. In the case of 6G, it's a story successful project. We have standards from 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. So the first thing is to recognize that 6G will be the home of 6G will be in 3VP. As I mentioned before, we need to integrate all the stakeholders, all the verticals, all the industry members who are going to use 6G in the future from the beginning. Because in the end, fragmentation occurs when there's overlap of standards, overlap of technologies, there's lack of interoperability, that leads to fragmentation. So we need an area, a playground where companies can agree to reach consensus and to define what is going to be the next generation of mobile systems. As I mentioned before, in the case of ETSI, we have a memorandum of understanding. We need to first to know who's out there, what they're doing. We need to go and talk to them. We need to invite them. We need to work together. In the case of 3PP, and maybe Milap can extend, but there's an obvious case of Open RAN. We start in 6G, and we start a conversation with ORAN and say, okay, What are you going to do? What is your scope? And what is my scope? Because there's a real danger here of duplication of work. So we started with a workshop with 3PP and Oran. We present ourselves. Okay, hello, I'm Oran. Hello, I'm 3PP. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. Proposal, discussion. Okay, this is what you could do, and this is what I could do. What I could do. And this led to the last meeting in Beijing. In the RAM groups, they say, okay, they have defined a work split, like this is in 3PP scope, and this part will be in Oran scope. Of course, we cannot ignore also geopolitical tensions. There's some maybe temptation to go and create standards or technologies regionally. But as I mentioned before, we have to assume that yes, you benefit, the local industry will benefit, but they cannot go international, they cannot become global, they cannot extend their market if they don't participate, if we don't work with a global standard. So in the end, it benefits everyone. We need to have interoperability working, and that's the way we do business.
Mm-hmm. My next question, Milap, for you is going to be about Open RAN. But before we do that, Amina, I want to go back to you because you mentioned the idea of having to accept that telcos and non-telcos, they're not speaking the same language all the time. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions telco players might have about the needs of aerospace and defense when it comes to connectivity standards?
Yeah, maybe one first role that the aerospace players are given when they are in standardization bodies is that they are users, they are verticals. They are like, okay, you're aviation, you're space communication, but you're still big users, major users of ICT, rather than service providers, connectivity service providers. And actually they are both. For example, if we look at the aviation, of course, it is a vertical, it's used in networks, but it's also providing networks inside the aircraft, but also we know that there are communications between the systems where they come from the aircraft manufacturer itself. On the space communication side, it's obvious that we are mainly connectivity providers, right? And whatever the platform, or actually I say space, but also non-terrestrial, the UAVs are a big enabler for non-terrestrial communications, for relays of terrestrial, but also regenerative UAVs to make sure the signal is as strong as we can expect from the terrestrial network. And at the end, sometimes we have both hats. We really have the ICT, the major ICT user role, so vertical role, but also the provider for some use cases, and mainly the use cases where the terrestrial network is not available, remote areas, aero connectivity, as I just mentioned, automotive and the railways industry, the maritime, all these call for space communications where the operators are not always the first ones to provide that service, at least not in a B2B model. We can mention others that come naturally to the aerospace industry are the defense communications, so secure communications, resilient, everything mission critical calls for resilient network, and most of the time it goes through space or a non-terrestrial network that can be less impacted by let's say failures or disasters on the ground. And so yeah, these two hats are there. Maybe we still need to talk more, and I think that the awareness is getting there, is that we're both providers and major users.
Right, thank you. And Milap, I promised Open RAN. So what role do you see for Open RAN and disaggregation principles in shaping 6G standards beyond what 5G achieved?
Yeah, again, this is an important question. It actually ties back to the principle of consuming innovation that we discussed a little bit earlier. So the ability to consume innovation is dependent also very much on the ability to deploy an open cloud-based disaggregated network. Now, when 5G was standardized, the Open RAN industry was very much in its infancy. And now over these past years, what has happened is that a lot of progress has been made. Open radios and basebands are commercially being deployed today. And correspondingly, an open management framework based on ORAN and 3GPP principles is also now becoming a commercial reality. So Open RAN is here to stay, and 6G standards, as they are developed, will need to recognize that. There is already some good progress made just very recently in 3GPP when there was an agreement that 3GPP will recognize the radio unit as a separate architectural entity with a front haul interface that could be specified in ORAN. So I think we are already starting to see some of this, these principles shaping 6G standards. And as Mirko also pointed out, this was one of the activities that was also started earlier this year with a joint workshop between ORAN and 3GPP. So we continue to see a really important role for Open RAN and disaggregation principles in continuing to shape 6G standards going forward.
Great. And my next question for you, Mirko, is kind of thinking about everything we talked about, speeding up innovation, bringing other non-telco players on board, all that kind of thing. Is there a structural reform you'd advocate for in how standard bodies work? Something that can make the process faster, more inclusive, more innovative?
Yeah, Milap advanced a bit about can 6G standards go faster. So I will say the definition of an entire mobile system is not an easy job. As I say, it takes an extremely long time, a lot of work that can be advanced a bit with pre-6G research. But when it comes to standards, the beauty and also the problem of it is that we need consensus. So that means in a single week, we have several thousand of documents to be revised, agreed, and discussed. We have a group of couple of thousand engineers typically in a single week within all our working groups, without counting the back office that need to work on the contribution. And then we need results from there. We need to start the work with study items, saying, okay, this is feasible, how do we do it? And then we have the normative part. And from there, you have to specify all the way from the radio interface to the core network to the messages between function entity, protocol, security, management, etc. So that takes an awful long time. And then you have to consider that, okay, we can be fast in standards, but does the market need us to be that fast? We need time to have the technology to be mature enough. We're just deploying 5G, and we're already thinking about 6G, but 6G, it's something that will be mature probably by near 2040. We're talking about that. We also have to think that, okay, on the other hand, there are other ways we can optimize, as I mentioned before. We need to streamline a bit, less options to make it more simple. We need to also to make the work more flexible. We have a study in 6G about spec modernization, saying, okay, everything about Open API, about code, we can just move it to environments such as Markdown or GitLab, kind of a software development. We should also get software development groups like we have in ETSI to allow software test beds where we can just start practicing, start checking interoperability from the software point of view. So in that sense, we can just make it more agile, but in the sense that can we faster? It's difficult to know because it also depends on the market. Like in Asian market, typically the users want to have the latest of it, the latest feature. That okay, next year I'll buy a new phone, and then I buy a new one. I want the latest feature. But in Europe, normally we look more. We are more conservative. We look in other things like sustainability is also very important. We want to be green. We look at the power consumption, and that necessarily means that and the market is a bit slower. So we have different requirements, and that's affected to the way the 6G standards will develop. Yeah.
Right. May I add a little thought to that? Yeah. So I think more than being faster, I think we also need to think really hard about exactly what we standardize. I mean, we are all, as part of the 3GPP or broader standards community, we are all guilty of allowing too many options in standards. We all are, guilty of not making that hard choice. Sometimes it's too easy to say, oh, we'll specify this option and this option, and then let the market decide which one wins. But that is very hard on the standards development process. It takes away time. And in the end, you may not be developing something that really the market needs. So this is something that is really important to keep in mind as we are about to start the 6G standards process.
Mm-hmm. Great. I have an audience question here that I'm going to direct at Amina, because I think it is officially a question for you, Amina, but I invite both of you to comment on it because there's some other implications kind of, in there. So Amina, telecom companies, vendors, MNOs, et cetera, are finding that it is increasingly difficult to resource their 3GPP work, having qualified standard staff, covering travel costs, that sort of thing. Given this difficulty, how do verticals justify participation when it's not part of their core business?
Well, again, so here, if I take the vertical hat and not the one that is contributing to the system specification, it's basically a forum of discussion for the future market. Like if I go to, let's say I'm automotive, I go to 5GAA, I prepare my requirements to be included by 3GPP work. If I'm Airbus, I go to the Seamless Air Alliance and I include my requirements, and then they are also pushed in 3GPP. But if I also go to 3GPP, not only to the MRPs, I also contribute from the technical perspective on how exactly the system is or should meet my needs, and avoiding 3GPP to do just or telcos or vendors to do just of a techno push, but really justify. It's more the other way around, is that they should justify why they're doing, why the feature is there, why the feature is included in the system. And this is actually from their business perspective is, okay, this is why I'm doing it. I have a perspective of customers in this and this and this area, and these are the use cases, because they got the chance to discuss with the verticals. They actually made the effort to come, even if they're not the experts, I would say, in 3GPP standardization work, but they still get the chance from that forum to express their needs, and making the discussion faster instead of, as Milap just said, also developing something that is not meeting any need, that is actually not at the end not used. And the other challenge, I would say, is how the telcos and the vendors would keep. They have the challenge actually to keep the implementation as open as possible, and maybe benefit also from open source, but also lowering the barrier not only for vendors, but only lowering the barrier for any let's say feature provider, right? Developer, software developer, or system integrator or vendor to provide something to those verticals. So it's there is definitely this challenge in standardization in general. We shouldn't go in limiting the implementation, but still, before going there, the needs that are expressed by the verticals going there is, so actually they are quite present, right? Maybe not at all the groups, but they definitely get something from being there and pushing with maybe more technical profiles to prepare for a business use case.
Thank you. And Mirko, I saw a lot of nodding. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I see very often it's not only for verticals, but many companies, unfortunately, when they cut budget, they cut costs, they cut standard teams. And I think they are not conscious of the importance of participation in standards, because it's real investment for the future. If you were not there from the beginning, if you were not there participating in discussions, then it's very easy in the future to say that 3PP is a closed club, or 3PP is not listening to the market needs. So that's, as I said, maybe it's not easy to see now when we started 6G, what's going to happen in 10 years or whatever. But if they were not here now, then of course, don't complain later that 3PP or 6G is not doing their job. So it's important as to, of course, if they don't have the budget, it's a real problem. That's okay. But the big companies may decide that not to bring resources to 3PP and participate, because maybe they don't understand how standards work, or they don't understand that it's a real investment for the future and how important it is to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the last question I'm going to pose to all three of you. And the question is, should 6G standardization be less about physical layer innovation and more about platforms, APIs, and service interoperability? Really, it's kind of your opportunity, I think, to say what should the priorities be ultimately. So you can kind of answer that as you see fit. But I will start with you, Milap.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see this as an either or question. I mean, I don't think you can get around not having physical innovations if you really want to enable new features and new services. So I think that aspect is going to be there. But I think the aspect of related to platforms, APIs, and service interoperability is very important as well. I mean, we want to make sure that when 6G is developed, it is developed very much for a cloud native type of platform, and that service interoperability is an important aspect of this. We want to be able to define new services. We want to be able to expose network capabilities, as well as support and enhance legacy services. So all of these aspects are very important. And unfortunately, there's no either or in my view.
Sure. Okay, Mirko, anything to add there?
Yeah, but I just wanted to remark that terms like API, service interoperability, platforms are already happening in 5G. So 6G, we see it as a continuation of the work started in 5G. For example, for the network exposure of network functionality, we just discussed in Beijing how we want to make it in 6G. So it's a very hot topic that is going to be there from day one. We want also, we have the common API framework, CAPIF, started already in 5G. And then I think Milap mentioned before, we want to, for monetizing or for budget, I would say, it's always better to do a software upgrade than a hardware upgrade, but that's also green. We have to be sustainable as well. But on the other hand, we're looking at a network that we want to work it to work 10 times faster than 5G. We want to have consumption 100th of the consumption of the devices today. We want to have more connectivity, 10 times more connectivity than in 5Gs. And we must not forget that IMT 2030, AT&T will have their own key performance requirements. So they will request, okay, 6G will have, or next generation mobile system will have these requirements. And for that, we have no choice but to create a new air interface. We cannot just have a 5G++, but we have to create a new generation, something like that is remarkably different from what we have in 5G.
Okay, perfect. And Amina, you get the last minute of the session to kind of wrap us up here.
Sure. I think if we look at the INT 2030 wheel diagram, the user scenarios, somehow we need to have all the features interconnected, name it, connecting like global connectivity, ubiquitous connectivity, resilience, intelligence everywhere, ubiquitous intelligence, I can even say, software as the major driver for all the systems, cloud also as being the infrastructure for all the systems as well. Interoperability would come to me more as a requirement. Well, interoperability of systems, but also interoperability in terms of roaming, etc. That is more of a can be more regulatory related. And also and sensing, for example. So if I go back to the question, I'm not sure we should like lower the interest that we're putting on the physical layer, because it's at the end a wireless system, right? So we need to make sure there's no bottleneck when it comes to the wireless interfaces, but and the radio interfaces, but everything else is really important. Mirko mentioned that we're building on 5G, that's true, but there are many other forums where we can reuse this API-driven systems, intent also, automation, the use of AI all across the system, maybe easier interfaces or simplified interfaces towards the customer, and all this again, I will mention TM Forum, but many other forums that are more complementary to the GPP. But at the GPP, I think the way discussions or the focus is put on both is remains important. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you all so much for this discussion. And thank you everyone for tuning in to the 6G Forum.
Thank you.